All right. We're just going to hang out for a few minutes, Puya, and we'll wait for folks to start joining the room.
Sounds good.
I'm excited for this conversation. I've been looking forward to this.
Me too.
I do have a little bit of a throat issue, so if you see me sipping water, it's just to keep this moistened.
I hear you perfectly fine. Just a little coarser than usual, but that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Well, we're officially in autumn, so I guess this sort of thing is expected.
Yeah. It's my favorite time of the year. I love the transition into the cool weather. Although where I live, it's never super hot anyway, but
Right. Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll say we'll get going. People will join as they join. So I want to welcome you to this live. Puya, we've had some interesting conversations around relationship issues, and myself as a mental fitness and purpose coach who works with midlife men, I know that this is a particular issue for men in midlife, and we'll talk about what those issues can be or are, and potentially how to resolve them. So we have, for our viewers, we're going to cover 3 specific topics. The first is the parent paradigm, and this is how at the earliest stages of our life, relationship models create sort of an unconscious pattern for us, and in terms of how we grow into relationships as adults. And some of those can be sabotaging kind of tendencies. So we'll look and explore that. The second part will be partnering parameters, and this is really the evolutionary psychology behind relationships and why we often repeat patterns in relationships and make the same mistakes over and over. We're kind of like, why am I doing that again? And then the last bit will be the 2 critical relationship phases. So in that early phase which we all love, right? Where we're just elated and so happy. And then it can become more challenging. So why don't we start out with just maybe a little intro, Puya, of yourself and who you are and how you got into this amazing work.
Absolutely, Loren. So first of all, thank you for inviting me as a guest. It's great to be here, and I've enjoyed every single conversation we've had so far, and I'm very excited about this talk. So I'm Puya Delavar. I'm a relationship coach. I'm the expert on all things relationship that people go to. For example, if they're tired of having the same argument over and over again, or if they're suffering from a lack of intimacy, or they're just frustrated because their partner's behavior doesn't make any sense, or even their own behavior doesn't make any sense. And what they actually want, instead of a relationship that is stressful, is one that is actually the source of their happiness and their energy. And this is what I provide with my program, and I'll talk about that later. So yeah, that's basically me in a nutshell. And I'd love to dig into all the very exciting 3 topics that we have planned.
Yeah. Before we dive into that, not to put you on the spot, but what brought you to this work?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. So I didn't start out as a relationship coach. So I've actually got 22 years of business relationship management, working in corporate world behind me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got married about 15 years ago, and 2 years after that, so about 13 years ago, I had a bit of a crisis. And I say a bit of a crisis. It was actually quite bad because it was affecting my health. It was affecting my career, my performance. And the only way I noticed that I need to do something is when I came home one day from the doctor, and the doctor was actually telling me that they recommend that I leave my job. And my wife said, and I came to her and I said, look, listen to what my doctor said, and I expected my wife to ridicule her. And she said, no, I absolutely believe that because I don't recognize you anymore. And I was at a stage where if I hadn't done anything, I would have absolutely ended up in divorce. My first kid was born at the time. So it was a very, very crucial time. And so I realized I need to take a break from the same routine and pattern that I was in,
Mhm.
step back, look at my life and see what I need to do. And I absolutely didn't want to end up in a divorce. I come from a broken family myself. So my parents separated, and I told myself I want to make sure that doesn't happen to me. So I spent ever since, so about 13 years, I've been continuously researching what makes relationship work. And
Nice.
I'm fascinated by this topic because even though I've always been interested in this behavioral psychology, what I've noticed is how little we really know about what makes the relationship work and
Mhm.
what triggers us to behave certain way and what influences us to behave how we behave. And in a lot of times we end up sabotaging our relationship without even realizing it.
Right.
So
And the word that one of the words, I mean, there are lots of really amazing words in there, but one of the words that you said that speaks to me is this patterning. Like we
yeah.
get into certain patterns and we live sort of the subconscious is running the show. And until we kind of like are woken up to that or awakened to it, that just becomes the pattern. So you could have been that statistic. You could have been that divorce and then into another marriage, which probably would have failed. But you had the good grace or the awareness to make the change. That's amazing. Thank
So
you
I
for
feel
sharing that.
No, absolutely. And I feel fortunate that I was able to do that. And I ended up helping a lot of my colleagues because I saw that they
Mm,
needed someone like this. I needed someone like myself now back then, and I
yeah,
couldn't find it. So I try to be that person for anyone who needs that and realizes I need to do something about saving my relationship, securing my family.
yeah.
And this is the reason I do what I do, basically.
And it's such a powerful thing. And I applaud you because I think for so many men, that idea of doing something different, stepping out of the comfort zone and exploring something that might take you into some vulnerability, some emotion, that's foreign territory for a lot of us. And I think that's why we see so much of this blaming and shaming and these problems that we'll get into. So, why don't we get into our first topic, which is the parent paradigm?
Yeah.
Take that away. Tell us about that.
Sure. So throughout my research, one of the most interesting facts that really influences our behavior, and the reason I got into this because I've always been interested in not focusing on the problem, but rather looking at the root cause.
Mm,
What is actually making me behave the way I behave, and what has influenced or rather created my programming for my mindset to be the way it is, and how can I change it? And the biggest influence we've had in our lives, in everything, is what actually happened in our childhood. And the dynamics that we were exposed to in the very first relationship that we were exposed to is the one of our parents. And that dictated a lot of what we see as normal behavior.
yeah,
And subconsciously, we carry that with us for the rest of our lives into our current relationship. And that's not necessarily good because our parents, as great as they were or weren't, weren't necessarily the best model um, for us to copy from. So what we need to do is create an awareness of what those dynamics were and detach ourselves to anything that is sabotaging our relationship. As an example, if we were exposed to parents that weren't necessarily creating a good connection between us themselves, without us even realizing this is what we try to look for or even create in our own
right.
relationship. And that's important to at least be aware of it. And I always say awareness is really the very first step for us to be able to make a
Mhm.
change.
Yes. Yeah.
And if we are at least aware, if we think back to our parents, and actually, and I'd like every person listening to actually do this exercise, think back
Mm,
to to their parents, and think, okay, what was my mother like, and what was my father like, and how much of that am I copying in my relationship? Or the other thing that actually happens is because we've seen that and we just don't like that, sometimes we go from one extreme to the other and actually
Mm.
do the opposite, which again doesn't necessarily benefit us. So if we're aware of it, we can then think, okay, I have the ability to disconnect myself from that mindset, because what I actually want is a relationship that is, and that we paint a picture of what we actually want the relationship to be like.
Mm. Yeah, that's powerful. And since you and I started talking, I've actually been doing some reading. So I want to understand myself better. And the question you just posed, and I hope people who are listening did that reflection, but what I saw was my dad as this distant and avoidant kind of person, to use that language, and very much, his own little world. There was no connection, nothing between my mom and him, and what was there seemed kind of hostile. Even as a little kid, I recognized that. He left when I was 8, but I could see that pattern in me now, being this kind of aloof, distant person in a relationship, and it's kind of like, I'll look after myself, thank you very much.
Right.
So now it's clear to me why that is, right? And rather than beating myself up about that, is what can I start to do about that?
That's great. I think what we need to be very clear on is that we don't need to blame ourselves in any way. So let's remove all judgment when we go through this process, because a lot of times people judge themselves. Oh, I am causing this. I am sabotaging. No. Forget all of that. The focus is trying to understand things so that we can move forward. We can make the changes that actually benefit us.
Yeah.
So that what you're describing is that there is actually 4 attachment styles when it comes to relationship. And what you described from your dad is an avoidant attachment style. And typically we carry that, especially, when we see that in our fathers, the males carry that, exactly in your situation. And I'm happy to talk about these 4 attachment styles briefly, but what we actually want to get to is what's called a secure attachment style, which
Right.
is the most positive, especially when it comes to relationships.
Yeah, and I think we all yearn for that when we're in a relationship that's dysfunctional or not working the way that we had hoped it would. And I can see too, just from exploring some of the conversations, whether it's online or whatever, with people in general, it's not only self-blame, it's also sometimes not owning our stuff and blaming the partner. Like,
Yeah.
she did this, she's not, whatever. And I see some of the stuff that I see discussed online, it kind of unsettles me, because it does feel a little bit like, and this is maybe just my bias or my perspective, that there is some blaming going on, even by some of the sort of subject experts. And I'm like, I don't know how helpful that is.
Right. I agree with you. Blaming isn't helpful in any way. And that's a typical mindset that people fall into, especially in relationships, because it seems a lot easier to blame someone else for our own shortcoming rather than actually facing that we might need to be making some changes ourselves, that
Right.
we need to make the first steps. And the people that I work with, my program is very much a self-awareness, self-development program, because if you do want real change, you really need to make it yourself. So it's a lot of inside work, right, in ourselves, so we can see the results on the outside. So I don't agree with necessarily always. I'm not saying that it's it always that people say it takes 2 to tango.
Mm.
Absolutely, if someone is at blame and they're not behaving well, that's not going to help you. But if you make the changes yourself and you go into a situation from a position of strength,
Right.
even if that doesn't reflect in that particular relationship, you've developed yourself in a way that you can benefit for the rest of your life. So all future relationships that you have. So even if that one doesn't work, you'll definitely be able to benefit from the next one.
Yeah, and I
And
love
what we
that, because the relationships that you're benefiting it's not just that immediate, most intimate relationship, it's all of them. Your colleagues at work, your
yeah,
friends, your neighbors. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Sorry, I think I
absolutely.
cut you off.
No, what I wanted to say is, so what's important is what you described earlier, but we carry the same mindset or negative mindset, or repeat the same mistakes from one relationship to another. That's exactly why.
Mm.
Because we don't make the changes in ourselves. We think, okay, well, our partner was to blame for this and this and
Right.
this. when we jump into another relationship, and rather than us having made any changes in ourselves to make the relationship work, we have an expectation that the new partner
Yeah.
then fulfills everything that the first one didn't.
Ding! Magic. Yeah. 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 And it's so funny because over the years when I was training and certifying people as yoga instructors, we do a lot of this deep personal development work in those programs, right? And
Mm.
one of the things I'd say is like, if you're not evolving, on your journey, your path, your spiritual, however you want to frame it, you're going to be repeating the same issues slash problems over and over again. And the example I would always use is, I'm dating that same person, but they have
Okay.
a different face, right? It's like, why do I keep dating the same issues, and yeah, yeah. Wonderful. So
Well,
let's shift gears a little bit and move into the partnering parameter. So uh, tell us all about this and how this plays out.
that actually ties in nicely with what we're talking about. So the way, and we talked a little bit about this just before the call, which was interesting. So the way we find a partner, there's so much psychology that goes into this. But typically, what we do when we find a partner is we're trying to find someone that is fulfilling what we ourselves are lacking. So we look for characteristics we think are attractive. What we find attractive is because we ourselves don't have that. So, for example, as much as I love what I do, I'm not a very emotional person, but my wife is probably over emotional. So, and I love that about her. So sometimes, without us realizing, we're trying to complete ourselves by finding someone that fills in the gaps. Now, that's good, but we should again be aware of the subconscious decisions that we're making when it comes to that. What's very, very important when it comes to this selection is having expectations that you have without having communicated them.
Mm,
Now, we'll talk about this later, but it's important when we meet someone new, we have a series of expectations that we want them to fulfill, and typically we don't communicate that
yeah,
either to ourselves because it's subconscious, and definitely not to our partner.
right.
And if that isn't communicated, if those expectations are not met, they will turn into resentments, and that would automatically cause problems for the relationship.
For sure. I can see that. I have a question. So you said often we're looking to be fulfilled with areas where maybe we have some deficiencies or a sense that there's some lacking. Is it ever that we're trying to like date ourselves, like a mirror reflection, like a narcissism kind of thing? I don't know if that's even the right terminology. Narcissism gets used so freely nowadays, but
Yeah, narcissism is an interesting label to put in my belief, because people are really funny about when it comes to narcissism. They say, "Oh, we have to be very careful." To a certain degree, I think we all have a tiny bit of narcissistic tendencies, and the reason for that is because we go into a relationship not necessarily always wanting to just give, but we also want to receive something back.
mm,
So it's a trade-off, which is great, because if it's done properly, the benefits are mutual. It's a win-win situation. What I would watch out for is situations where, and this is typical narcissists, is they don't have any tendency to think about what they're giving to a person, but only think about what they take from
okay.
that person, and that can be really dangerous. So I would be very, very careful about that. And typically, narcissists go into a relationship and make that person feel as if they get everything that they really look for in a relationship. So they're very good at reading you to find out what you're missing and what are you looking for, what you crave, and they give all of that and probably too much of it. And as soon as they realize that they've got you hooked, then they start taking that away and make you dependent on them. So
Okay.
that's obviously a very, very toxic situation we don't want to be in.
Mm,
What we want to make sure we understand is we understand ourselves better. And this is partly why what I do in my program.
mhm,
This is why I call it a more self-awareness, self-development. If you understand yourself better, you understand what you crave, what you look for in a person, and also when you are in a relationship, why do you snap at a certain situation?
mhm.
Why do you react a certain way? Why does your partner react? All of that, a lot of that is about understanding yourself. So if
Yeah.
you have that, when you look for a partner, you already have a better selection process. And when you start a relationship, you're in a much better position to start it in a healthy way, and also give you the best chance to last.
Yeah, and for me too, when I work with clients, the first bit of the work is always deep dive into self-awareness,
Yeah,
and it's when you think about it, it's really perplexing how we function.
it is.
And some believe, and I sort of embrace this as well, that we're children operating in adult bodies in this child's operating system, and this is why some of our emotions are just so whacked out, especially for men, right? That we don't have a lot of self-awareness, and I think that that's crucial. Any tips on how, maybe even just to sort of identify, I'm maybe not as self-aware as I could be, whether it's in a relationship or not.
Yeah. I think what I would say is, if you find yourself in situations then that repeat and don't
Mhm.
make sense to you. So if you end up either having the same argument with even multiple partners, from one relationship
Yeah.
to another, if the same patterns keep repeating, that's definitely a sign that you need to reach deeper and understand something about yourself to cure that. Because especially if the same kind of problems happen with multiple partners, is definitely a problem that you need to solve within yourself. That's
Right.
one thing. The second is, I would see if you're going always for the same characteristics in a partner.
Hmm.
That again, because you're trying to fulfill something that you're lacking, um, that's something that you need to understand about yourself better, to see what it is that you're actually seeking in a partner. What kind of fulfillment are you looking for? And the third
Mhm.
one is what we talked about earlier, going back to your childhood. What happened in your childhood that has created those cravings, what it is you're looking for in a partner? So, well, maybe there was a lack of love that you received from your parents, or a lack of attention, or what happened with your siblings. So I 100% agree with you when you say that we are children with multiple layers of ego on top of it. So
Yeah.
deep down, we are still that same child from 20, 30, 40 years ago. And
Mhm.
understanding what that child's needs were back then is the way for you to understand what your needs are today.
Yeah, and ergo all of the healing, the inner child work that we've heard about for decades now. I think another thing too, just to answer the question around self-awareness, I think in midlife, what I see with I went through this myself, and I see with clients I work with, is there can be just a general malaise, right? An angst, like that something's, and it's hard to kind of put your finger on, and I think that's where that deep dive into some self-discovery work, that awareness building, is really really essential. um, because for me at that stage anyway, it's kind of like your soul is wanting you to be your fullest, brightest, beautiful version of yourself, but the ego stuff and the who you think you are is what keeps you stuck and in those patterns, right? So
Yeah.
I'm all for the self-awareness building for sure.
And I think the work that you do, Loren, is absolutely fantastic. Because you really do have a lot of that deep dive, especially with midlife. Midlife is a very, very interesting part of our life, because when we're younger, we have all these hopes, and the future is still so far away. We think, okay, well, I'm going to do this and all that. When you get to midlife, you reflect back and think, hang on a second, I had all these dreams. How much of it have I achieved? And
Yeah.
is this life what I was hoping for? And if it's not 100% matching what your dreams were like, or what your expectation were like, then you really start a crisis. So,
Yeah.
and it's the same
Or
with
or
relationships.
or if it is what you wanted and you got there and you're kind of like, ugh, like that could be a problem too, right? So
Yeah.
let's shift gears one more time into our final topic, which is these two critical relationship phases. So walk us through that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like it nicely described at the very beginning, there's the beginning phase that we all love, the honeymoon period,
Mm,
and that's all fantastic. And it's probably, a lot of people say it's the most enjoyable part of the relationship. I have to disagree, because I think every single part of a relationship, every phase of it can be
mm,
beautiful if we make the best out of it. Now, why the beginning matters so much, and I touched on this tiny bit earlier, this is the time to be as open and communicative as possible. Because as I said, we go into a relationship with a set of expectations that we ourselves might not be aware of, so it's all subconscious. Um, this is the time to open it up and tell our partner exactly what those expectations are. As awkward as it might feel, if those expectations are communicated, and also you show openness to your partner that you're willing to even hear their expectations, you eliminate a lot of the confusion and resentment that could happen in the future. And that paves the way for you to have that open communication throughout your relationship. So I would say,
sounds like you really have to step into some deep vulnerability, right?
yes, yes,
And put yourself out there. Yeah.
yes. And a lot of it is interesting because it's really big expectations. And I've seen my uncle, for example, he entered the relationship and they absolutely loved each other. And he really wanted to have kids and she didn't. And that broke them up, that they got a divorce. And that wasn't communicated early
Yeah.
enough. If they had, they wouldn't have gone through this bitter, difficult phase. Now, it's important because if you don't and you end up suffering in the future, you're always going to look back and think, if I had done this, I wouldn't have gone through this. So again, I think it's important to communicate that. As obvious as it might be, it's important. And also there's a whole set of different, depending on the culture, what we see as, for example, cheating might be different in different cultures. Some people might see flirting with another person as cheating, or even kissing as cheating, or whatever else. And other cultures might have different understanding of what actually cheating. Those need to be communicated. So I would recommend, as a very beginning, as beautiful as this honeymoon phase is, still have that difficult conversation, sit down with your partner and say, look, just so you know, this is what I would like to happen. This is how I see us in 5 years, 10 years.
Nice.
And this is what I would like to get from you.
Nice.
I would 100% recommend that.
Nice.
So that's the phase one. And the other one is when you pass that honeymoon phase, when the novelty wears off and you start settling down, and especially if you're in for the long haul, if you want to have a partner for the rest of your life, then you have to learn a number of skills that enables you to manage difficulties better. And again, I go through all of that in my program with my clients, but a lot of it revolves around how you frame communication. So it's very, very important to frame it from a position of empathy. So if you go to your partner, for example, if you go into a relationship and you've reached a stage where life challenges are increased, there is a lot more work needed, or children are born, basically your situation has changed. Rather than going in and saying, you do this, and start this accusation cycle, it's better to go in with the framing of, this situation that's happening, or this thing that you're doing is making me feel a certain way. And the framing it makes all the difference, because you're not starting a battle anymore. What you're doing is just sharing how something is making you feel. That automatically puts the other person, rather than put them on defense, it also opens up for them to then be able to share what they feel.
Yeah.
And that exchange of where you're at can be absolutely amazing, because it makes you appreciate your partner. It all makes your partner appreciate you more. And at the same time, you realize that you've been taking a few things possibly for granted that you might not have even realized. So just to give you an example, and I'm just painting a picture here. A very stereotypical, a man who's working late hours, the mother staying at home looking after his kids. The man comes home expecting the wife to just say, to understand that he's had a really difficult day, and say, oh, I really appreciate you, honey, blah, blah, blah. And the woman, taking care of the kids all day, expecting the man to come home and just for her to be able to just explain what she went through. And rather than actually saying, how was your day, honey? What difficulties did you go through? Or tell me about, something interesting that happened. Or instead of that, they're low on energy already because it's been a stressful day, and they're just very short with each other. And rather than opening up, they just have this expectation that
Yeah.
isn't met, which then turns into resentment. And then before they know it, they lash out with a comment that makes the situation even worse. I hope
Yeah.
that makes sense what I explained.
No, 100%. And it sounds so trite, but it all comes down to communication, right? And when we're communicating, just the act of communicating, even when those conversations can be difficult, can be challenging, like your energy's low, you're frustrated already. Just that act of communication shifts the energy such that you can connect, right? That there's a more cohesion as opposed to that repelling kind of energy of, these two bodies that have both had their days and their issues and their struggles and their,
Yeah.
yeah. So communication, I think, is just really, really vital for all relationships. And, as someone who's, spent a lot of time trying to become a better communicator, I've seen how that's created a lot of strife in my life, assuming things. Mm-hmm.
Yes, exactly. And again, communication is great, but there is an art to it. So it's how you communicate
How you
that can be
communicate.
more
Yeah.
effective than just saying, I'm just going to let everything out. No,
Right.
you need to be aware of
Some
how it's
structure.
coming
Yeah.
across.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's
Yeah.
great. Yeah. Good. So, tell us a little bit about your program for people that might be interested in exploring some more.
Yeah, absolutely. So my program has three main stages. The very first stage is a discovery stage where we basically map out and audit the relationship to see where the difficulties are, what works, what doesn't work, understand the influence of the past in our to our present, so childhood, previous relationships, what kind of baggage are we carrying from our
Mhm.
past to our present that is influencing. And once we've mapped it out, then we can really start working with it. Then there's a process, which is the second phase of education, understanding ourselves better, understanding how to communicate better, understanding our needs. And I have, based on my research, there are three basic needs that we all have, and every single one of us has those. And interestingly enough, every single crisis or issue that happens in a relationship can be rooted to one of these needs not being met, at least
Right.
one of them not being met. And I'll talk about these needs briefly. Um, just to cover them very briefly, one of them is the need for closeness. We need to feel that we're able to um, feel close with our partner, not just physically, but also emotionally. So when we're next to them, we don't feel alone, which is what we talked about earlier. We feel as if we have each other's back. And part of that is just having this knowledge that your partner wants you as much as you want them. And I don't mean want you as physically at that moment, but
Mhm.
wants to have a future with you. And that knowledge is extremely important. So that brings that closeness. The second need is the need for feeling valued. Now, what that means is that you need to feel as if your thoughts, your input, your opinion matters as much to your partner as your partner's does to yours. So a lot of times this is very one-sided, whereas one person feels as if they run the show and whatever they say goes, whether it's the man or the woman or whatever, one of the partners is doing that. And that creates that feeling that the other person doesn't feel as valued. And the third need is fairness, is the feeling that you're being fairly treated, so that you're not being put down, you're not being talked over, you're being respected in a way that you feel as if you're a peer in a relationship rather than you feeling lower. It goes um, very closely with feeling valued, but you need to feel as if whatever you're inputting into the relationship is seen as equal as your partner. Now,
Mhm.
these three needs are extremely important, and what we do is we go through the recent, let's say, 3 months, 6 months, and we find out what the biggest problems are, and we find out which one of those needs haven't been met for that situation. That's the second phase of discovery. And the third phase is really whatever we've learned, whatever we've mapped out, whatever new skills that we've discovered, we we make sure that it becomes the new norm. So it becomes a new habit, and
Mm.
then it becomes a long-term thing, and you wouldn't believe the difference that makes in the relationship. And I typically work with individuals on purpose because, again, it needs to happen. The change needs to happen within us for us to be able to then reflect that in our relationship.
Right, right. Yeah. And I love the way that your approach is, and you use the word several times, the term root cause, right? So we want to be connecting with what's at the root of all this stuff rather than doing the window dressing out here, because then these problems are just going to continue to perpetuate themselves. Yeah.
Absolutely. No,
Yeah.
it's a lot more interesting to find a root cause, even for ourselves,
Yeah.
because rather than just complaining about things, what we actually want, and all of us, is for that problem to go away.
Yeah.
And complaining about it will never make it go away. But understanding what has caused it and eliminating the root cause would definitely make it go away.
Yeah. And I've had to learn that over my years, even with some of the, I've worked with some really powerful spiritual teachers for long periods of time, 15 years, the most recent one, 5 years. And one of the things that I was initially taught, and it could have been my misapprehension, was we don't need to necessarily figure out the root cause. We just need to move forward. Now I realize that's a problem. It's like, no, that root cause is always going to be festering and doing its thing if we don't kind of figure it out. So I really appreciate that perspective.
Just focusing on moving forward almost feels like we're brushing the issue under the carpet and
100%.
forgetting about it. Let's
100%, and
yeah.
not facing sort of the reality
Right.
of it. Yeah, so that's great. So I wanted to open it up for Q&A, and I don't know that we're going to have, if there's anything showing up, if there are any questions. I actually have a question that I would like to pose.
Sure.
And it's around being single. As a single person, I've been single most of my adult life. And, there hasn't been an issue / problem with that for the most part. I'd have my periods of feeling lonely, but then I'd also date for a while and then feel really lonely in those situations because I didn't properly know how to communicate, as we've discussed, right? But the thing around being single that's very interesting is it almost feels like it's stigmatized, right? Like there's some defect or something wrong with someone who is single. And I just thought it'd be interesting to have you, as someone who's a relationship expert and does work, I know, around couples, but your perspective on singledom.
Right. I generally don't like to put a negative spin on anything. I personally think that we're probably more capable of reaching our potential when we're with someone. And the reason I say that is because it creates an environment where we can relax and not have to worry about if we're doing anything wrong. And I totally agree that there seems to be a stigma about, oh, if you're single, that means that there's something wrong with you. That's why you can't find someone. And that's totally wrong. And I think, especially these days, finding a right partner seems to become more and more difficult as time goes by. To me, the most important thing is being happy with who you are. And some people actually come to me when they're not in a relationship, and they ask if I can help them find a partner because they keep dating the wrong guys or girls, or they just can't seem to find. And they ask me, I've actually had a guy who was a professor. He actually came to me and said, look, I keep dating different girls and they seem to lose interest after the second date. And I keep trying different things, and I do this and I act this way. And I said, look, one thing you're not doing is just being yourself.
Being authentic, yeah.
And the reason that they can't find someone is because they're not comfortable enough with themselves. And I'm not saying necessarily that the case with everybody who is single, but it's important for you to be comfortable with yourself, so that if you met yourself, you would think, oh yeah, I like this guy. This guy is attractive because of their personality and everything else. Once you're at that stage, you automatically become a lot more attractive to someone else that would be a potential partner. But unfortunately, we don't let ourselves get there. We keep picking faults with ourselves and finding out what we're missing. and
Yeah.
we're just focusing on the negative.
Yeah.
We just need to be comfortable with ourselves first. And I think, obviously, if we're in the right environment, we need to meet the person. And if we're with ourselves, if we don't attract one particular person, it's because that person isn't right for us. But if we are someone else that we're pretending to be because we think that becomes more attractive, and if that we do find someone else, then they're not finding us attractive enough. They're falling in love, or
A
finding
persona of some sort. Yeah.
exactly with
Yeah.
they're falling in love with a mask, and that's obviously not going to last. So I would recommend, first of all, be comfortable with your situation. If you are single, be comfortable with that, because uh, it's important for you to, again, love yourself. And I know it sounds cheesy, but it really is important to love yourself first. And if you do need to make some changes to yourself because you've done that self-discovery, self-awareness exercise, and if you find that, okay, these are areas that I would like to change, make the changes, be comfortable, be that attractive person to yourself first, and then
Mhm.
automatically, I think you would find someone else who would find you attractive for exactly who you really are. And that's a relationship that would definitely last.
Yeah. Yeah. There's power there for sure. That's great. So I don't see any questions in the chat. So any final words of wisdom for us before we wrap up here? You've shared some amazing content and ideas. So any concluding comments?
But I would go back to the whole if there is a situation you're not comfortable with, don't complain. Try to find out what's caused it, and really focus on that, especially if you want a positive resolution. Because I've seen too many people complaining about the same situation and not making any changes. So that somehow
Mhm.
they expect a different outcome by doing exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
That is never going to happen. If you do the same thing, you're going to get the same outcome for sure. So I
Right.
would say, if we're really serious about creating a life that we want differently to what it is now, then think about making changes, and definitely seek out help. Someone in yourself, go to some expert who can look at things from a third perspective,
Mhm.
because you don't necessarily always are able to see everything that you're doing differently. You need that third perspective view. So go to an expert, get help, work with someone, but also make that the most important thing. Is the very first thing that you need to do, the very first step, is make a decision that you're going to make changes to yourself. So you want to develop. And once you do that, everything else will follow.
Beautiful. So how can people find you? You've mentioned your program. How can they find out more?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, so that's where I'm mostly active. I've also got a website, so it's basically my name would be puya.delavar.com. You can just contact me from the website, or if you are on LinkedIn, then just send me a DM. You can just reach out, and I'm always happy to have a conversation. I actually have an ongoing case study where I ask people who are in long-term relationship that they're willing to talk about challenges they
Mhm.
face, to just have a 20-minute chat with me. And I have, if they would like to discover more about having a more fulfilling relationship, it doesn't matter what stage of the relationship they're in, whether it's the beginning and they want to make sure that they have the best guarantee of long-term success, or in their later stage, the midlife of their life or their midlife of their relationship, and they want to make sure that they get a relationship that is thriving rather than one is just surviving, then
Right.
just send me a message and we'll have a conversation and see how
That
we can
sounds
work.
great. And from my point of view, one of the areas where I do work is in this area of positive intelligence and our inner saboteurs. And part of my discovery of late is that I've got this hyperachiever saboteur, and it's kind of toxic because it creates a sense of conditional self-love. Like,
Yeah.
unless you're doing X, Y, and Z and doing really well, you're not good enough. You like for yourself, let alone in a partnership, right? So if
Right.
anyone's interested in exploring their inner saboteurs, that's an area where I'm developing expertise, and it's fascinating. It's fascinating because there's so much of that those voices inside of us that just keep us from our full potential, just as having the right not having the right partner can keep us from becoming, fully realized. This has been really, really great. I really appreciate your time and your expertise. It's just fascinating. I could go on, like, I have so many questions in my head, but we need to wrap things up. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. And it's been a pleasure talking to you, Loren.
Great. We'll see you soon.
Sounds good.
Take care.
Thank you. You too.